Evening, everyone. No, I haven't made a video in a while, but I only get so much time with the kid right now to make them. So this should hopefully be a short instead of an hour rambling, maybe a 15, 20 minutes on a very specific topic. As you know, ETC is about 7 months away. Well, 8 months, 6 months at this point. The U.S. team will be picking in about 2 months. And as we gear towards playing more and going into that, my thought is, it's really, I think the balance patch will be out in a couple 2 weeks or so, the final update. And once that hits, that is the Warriors book for ETC, and so that's the book I have to iterate on it to some extent. Assuming I'm going to take Warriors to ETC, which I'm pretty sure it will happen. I don't think it would be any surprise. Um, and so part of that iteration, you know, at least in my mind and how I do it, and I think similar to how like Thomas and I when we talk and Curiel, I'm much more of a small change iteration type guy than I am sweeping change. I don't. In some of my other videos, we've talked about really big list idea changes, whether it's double Helmall, or other huge changes, and the way that I iterated on the last list, to get to kind of where it really was like little by little, where you say, okay, I'm going to drop this for this, or I'm going to change my course slightly, or I'm going to drop paired weapon off my elder so I can free up this point, so I'm going to add in chosen knights. And I use those kind of lists as frameworks for new lists. And one thing I do a lot is I kind of compare like threats, right? Like, so what are you getting? How many threats do you have? How many scoring do you have? We talked about magic and all that kind of stuff. Um, and so, as I go through this process and as I iterate on lists, one thing I want to keep in mind, and I've talked about this before, and I just haven't been good about doing this, is, really getting a sense of, here's the 16 armies. There are variants of each army that affect Warriors of Dark Gods differently. For example, an ambush heavy army versus a monster heavy army versus I don't know, a beast herds. I think that affects people differently than it affects me. Like, in my mind, ambush doesn't really matter for warriors. We don't really have many bunkers and stuff to worry about. Whereas, and even monsters versus no monsters, I think it maybe affects a little bit how you play the matchup, but it's not necessarily this huge like turning point for I don't know. If I was talking about beast herds and then thinking about what is good against beast herds and what units do I need, I don't know if I would list out like all the variants of beast herds. I would just say, all right, beast herds are fighty, little range damage with a good fighty. Warriors are basically fighty with better range damage. So, we have some perks in that sense. Whereas, probably more an extreme example would be VC, where maybe a variant with I think Shrieky Horrors are very big. What's the word I'm looking for? I mean, they're a big deal, clearly, right? And having one or two or zero Shrieking Horrors against, especially the style that I tend to play, is massive. But at the same time, from the Vampire Counts player, it's also massive on their end because that's 1,000 points and a flying monster. And if somebody has a lot of shooting or div magic, they may just lose them and then they're down, 1,000 points, and it's a really big part of their army, offensive wise. So, that's kind of an example where one of the worst lists I could ever face is a double Shrieking Horror Vampire Counts army. But at the same time, there's variants without that have become much, much easier to play against. And the single variant being kind of in the middle. And so you can kind of explore it as you go. And I guess the idea behind this is when you make a change, and we're going to talk about one specific change. I know it's already been 4 minutes. When you make a change, you kind of have to sit there and think, well, how does it help my scope of all this? Does it really change anything? Does it help? Does it hurt? Does removing all, you know, does removing all alchemy, I don't know, units that are bad against alchemy, like the Death Shield Lord I'm playing right now, or knights or something like that. Does removing all that from your army help enough in some matches, or is it kind of like it doesn't matter? Anyway, that's something I do want to work on, but that's not what today's video is about. Probably the next, I'll say, big change that is being discussed when it comes to my circle of Warriors players is this idea of magic. And, for so long, we had rode the Herald and Chariot Mage train, as you could say. And that was fine. You get 5 spells. The Chariot Mage has 2 amazing buffs for warriors in the armor and Glory of Gold, and then you have the Herald who has, he can take Veil Walker if he needs to. He can take buffs. He has a full kit of spells, and usually you're set with 5 really good spells, and you have a good toolbox just enough. And then the Mage kind of acts as this single model piece that kind of helps support the army, combo charge, clean up little things, sit back. It's not really a target. It's one of those target saturation things where people don't have time to kill the mage usually. Like there's too many things barreling down on you that you don't really worry about him. And so then he sneaks up and, combo charges or hits a unit and locks it down. But that being said, that mage has gone up pretty substantially in points. Like he's at 485 right now. That's with a change where he's only offense 3 and with Dragon Main Gem. And, he was 460. And so now the talk is, can we replace that mage? And then, I think the initial discussion was, hey, let's just take him off the chariot and let's just put him on foot, and just take an alchemy guy on foot. And one thing that kind of happens with that is ranges are very hard. I think you can get away with it if you put him on a horse or potentially with ranger's boots is something I've seen. But then the talk kind of evolved to a Wizard Master. And I know, listen, the fact that Wizard Masters went up and I didn't like them before, it feels blasphemous to talk about it. But we're going to talk about it, and that's what this video is about. It's the idea of taking a Herald and a Wizard Master. I've done it before. I think I copied Little Thomas's list long ago where he had an Occultism Master, double portals, and a Herald, and basically you just blast people with the Occultism guy, and the Herald has more free to take normal shit. I don't think in this case that's not what we're going to talk about. We're actually going to talk about the Evo Master, because I don't think alchemy really fits the bill of what you want. I don't think you're gaining enough with the other alchemy spells. Like, sure, you want to take Glory of Gold and armor, but those are pretty much the 2 big ones. And I don't think, having access to Lash, -1 armor, Spike, and Copper is really where you're like, those are what I really need in this army. That's really what I'm missing. And so Evo is kind of like, in Occultism, again, you have access to a lot of those big spells through the Herald Veil Walker. You have almost every spell except for the ward save. And so again, it's a little short range. It kind of requires Veil Walker's consideration, but also it kind of requires Veil tokens and sacrifices. And I already think the army is a little bit limited on that. It doesn't really offer the buffs you might want. So it really is going to focus on an Evo Master. And this is something that I've seen single Evo Masters. I've seen Evo Masters with, Heralds is kind of not, it's been seen, but it's more of, in my mind, on, something I want to try. And we'll kind of talk about Veil Walker, but I don't know how much of a big deal Veil Walker is to me in this case. So let's look at the Evo lore, and we'll talk about it. And a lot of these comparisons are going to have to be twofold. One is in comparison to what spells you're getting from the Adept. Obviously, he's more points. He's +1 to cast, so there is a value there. He's about the same amount of points as the guy on the Chariot. I think he's a little cheaper. So there is, kind of a 1-to-1 there. I think he's 460 with the Binding Scroll right now without Veil Walker. So, and obviously the guy on foot is like 300 or something if you don't take any, you basically take, anyway, that's not the point. We're going to compare the two. Because we basically said the Chariot guy's a little bit overpriced right now. So spell-wise, let's just talk about it. Okay, so you get Spectral Blades, which you're pretty much always going to take. And I think this one is, when you compare him to the Alchemy guy, you're pretty much always going to take it, and it's pretty much almost always better than Glory of Gold. It's a 9 to cast, a 6 for the little one, so it's a very easy 2-diceable one for a master if needed, or a safe 3-dicer, whereas, an 8 on 3 dice is fairly safe, but not always. 18-inch range, so it's the same range as Glory of Gold. I will say there is a little bit inherent extra or built-in decrease in range to Glory of Gold, because you have to be within 18 of both the enemy and your unit to get the full benefit because you're for the attribute. So I actually think that's actually a bigger deal than people think because if you think about oh shit, where are we? You think about your unit, your mage is here and your unit's here, right? Like there's a good like your unit sticking back is like an extra 2 inches of range, and so you might not be in range of the enemy to get the attribute. So having just a straight 18 inches is nice, and obviously lethal is a really good one. If you kind of take into account like heralds, like stomps, spike shields, impact hits, which his army doesn't have, but it actually came up a lot in the other list with the chariot mage, where you charge in with the chariot mage, and you're like, well, I'm going to glory gold myself to reroll, my 4 strength 5 attacks, and I don't get to reroll the impact hits. The same with the stomps. You could do the attribute to get the reroll in the breath weapon that the herald comes with when he takes fly, but now you actually can get reroll the wound on the toxic breath. So I mean, just reroll the wound is just better. Whether it's lethals and all this, I mean, and then lethals actually give things like warriors um, a chance to like kill 1-up save heroes or really threaten big monsters. Obviously, big monsters doesn't matter. Like really, like knights, like you can charge them. And Glory Gold was good. You'd be AP2, but I mean, lethals is just like you might just kill 3 or 4 of them. And it's just so threatening to characters. So it's pretty much one of the best spells in the game, if not the best spell in the game. And so having access to it in an army with a lot of attacks is never going to be bad. And something you can kind of build your army around a little bit. Like if it kind of opens up the option of paired weapon barbarians who are super cheap now. Even like 20 of them I think is like 200 points. And now it kind of turns the threat of, okay, I'm AP4, strength 4, AP0, and I'm about to be strength 4, AP0, reroll to wounds, lethals, which is a big deal. Okay, so that kind of, I think, replaces Glory Gold pretty evenly. No flaming, but usually that could be a detriment. Then you get 2 more buffs with Whispers of the Veil or Ancestral Aid, a debuff and a buff. Both pretty good. Obviously, armor is a different kind of buff, and armor is a very strong buff. And it may even change like the units you take, right? So I think armor was insanely the strongest on things like Greed Knights or Chosen Knights, because you're really, for the easy to cast version, you're really getting that a lot of value for a 5. Because 2 up to 1-up can be super huge. Now, of course, getting an Elder to a 1-up save can be really big as well. But I mean, there's value in both. There's value in like having offensive type spells, like reroll to hit can be really good on Elders and Herald. Well, not Heralds, they hit on 2 a lot, but like it can be good. Whispers is also decent depending on the enemy. You might even take it over Ancestral Aid. You basically get access to 2 to 3 buffs depending on what you want to do. You probably also, now you have 3 other spells: Hasten, Touch the Reaper, and Dance. So the Touch the Reaper is probably the most obvious one, where it kind of comes with this like it can become a very must-stop spell, or it's a nice spell to roll 2 dice at and hoping for a 6. And D3, strength 10, even against monsters or cav or something, can be really good. Whether it's sniping heroes, it's like a threat. It's like a big threat spell and this is where you can make the Veilwalker debate, and I don't want to make the whole Veilwalker debate now. But if you do have a Veilwalker on the guy, evocation is really nice for Veilwalker because it generates tokens, which really helps. But also you could, a Touch the Reaper is just a big important spell people have to stop. And we'll talk about how pairing it with the Herald can be a really big deal after we kind of get through it. Hasten the Hour is another good spell. I think the big version's underrated. Doing just 3 hits, things to like. I mean, I'll put it this way: a 4-up save elf unit gets hit by a Hellfire, right? And it's 7 hits, 3.5 saves. It's like 3 wounds, roughly. And this is 3 wounds as well. And that's to a 4-up save elf unit. So to anything with like a good save, anything, it's like 3. It's 3 dead. And so whether it's knights or an ogre unit instantly killing one, like it definitely has some uses compared to the H spell, or in it kind of goes well with it, where there's times where you need to kind of deal with armor and you want to take lash. Like there's times I want to take lash on my mage, but you don't really have the substitute. Like you don't have the range of spells to take it, And so having 7 spells versus 5 really gives you that option to have these in your back pocket and a little bit more flexibility if needed. It's also kind of nice for killing champions. If there really is an important champion, just throwing 2 dice at a 7, it might be a big deal. It might be the difference between your Herald getting out a turn earlier or not, or just not having to challenge with somebody. And I think the new one and the big one that I've actually played with and used, and it's actually pretty fun to play with, is Dance. So Dance got a pretty big buff in the recent patch where it went from 8. Did it get a better casting value? Did it go up or down? It might have went up in casting value. I actually don't know if it was a 5 before or not. Let's look. Evo. It increased by 1, which is fair. I mean, it's still an easy 2 or 3 dicer. It's a reliable 3 dicer. You can 2 dice it. I mean, it's a 5. And I think the big thing for at least a Warriors perspective would be the 18-inch range is huge because it's just, being 12 inches farther is just much easier to cast. And the 12-inch ghost step is much better than 8 inches. And we'll talk about that real quick. So obviously, pretend this is your wizard, right? Pretend this is your wizard. You probably wouldn't be on a horse, but, in a typical game, we'll even say the Herald, right? The Herald starts here, right? About, in a typical game where the Herald starts like here and the Mage starts here, you can do stuff where the Herald moves like 16 inches, and then, the Mage can move his 8, and it would be almost impossible without 18 inches to get to this guy. And then the 12-inch ghost step, can do whatever. Now, this is not a real piece of terrain where it is, but let's just say it was here, for example. Although one other big part about 18 inches is, or 12-inch move, is it actually goes all the way through this terrain piece and buildings. So the size that these impassable are, if you just had an 8-inch move, you'd never make it all the way through. But now you can make it all the way through, which I think is actually a little bit more underrated. You can also, if the Herald flies, you can use this fly, which is actually pretty nice. So like it's almost just like an extra move. Like even if you took Stubborn Fly and you landed in front of somebody and then you cast this on him, you could go over them and land behind them. So 18-inch range is so much easier to get in range and have this wide, just look at the 2 rings. And 2, being able to go all the way through terrain is really big, because one of the arguments against movement spells a lot of the time is you don't want to put yourself into a position where the movement spell is a detriment if you don't get it off, like maybe you're getting charged or something like that. And at the same time, you really want to be able to take full advantage of it. And so something like Elders or something speedy, especially with the increased range and the low casting value of 6, if you put an Elder here, a very common place to put an Elder is like here, to look over the flank, be protected, people can't charge you potentially. And so this becomes this anchor point where I throw 2 dice at it, and they have a choice. They either roll their dice and potentially face the wrath of the rest of my spells, that's actually a pun into what we're going to talk about, or I get to move 12 inches through the terrain piece, and now you have an Elder looking down your flank, and you have to deal with that. And so, one, having a Herald complement this means you can take the Dance spell more often and not feel as bad, because the Herald does come with other buffs and damage spells. But also, one reason it couples well with it is, so if we look at the Herald's perspective, right? So I was almost always taking 2 buffs on my alchemy guy, almost all the time. So I really couldn't take Quicksilver Lash. It just wasn't a thing unless you were facing like an army that had no thing to flaming attacks. Like an ID, you might not want them or something. Anyway, and so now you're looking at the Herald, and one thing that's nice about it is when you're taking, for example, the Flying Herald, the Flying Stubborn Herald that you take a lot versus elves, well, you want Pentagram because you want to heal, and you want, Breath Weapon because it's just good. And a lot of the times I wouldn't take Comet. Maybe this is a poor example, but depends on the matchup. There's a lot of matchups where I wouldn't take Comet because it was the only spell that was worth casting in the turn 1. Like, the only spell worth casting. Like, there just wasn't anything else. Like, what are you going to, like, there was no good Hellfire targets. Maybe Breath Weapon was okay. Elves is a different example. And the armors and the glory golds aren't turn one spells for the most part. So you really, people could just sit on comment and you're like, all right, well, my second best spell is, I don't know, an H spell against, I don't know. And it's hard to get both of them off big wise. But now, because three dicing a 10 for big Hellfire is actually pretty tough on, it's not really that reliable. I don't like doing it. I would more likely do it on a master. But now we're in this realm where, you know, I've made the comment before, you're only as good as your second best spell. And that's semi true. Well, now you're in this realm of your first turn could be potentially Touch of the Reapers on somebody's character if they're in range, especially with Veilwalker, rerolls or extra range. It could be a big hasten. It could be um, those are the two big ones. I mean, even like a 2 dice touch. Let's just say a 7 dice phase. Like it could be 2 dice touch, 2 dice dance, 3 dice hand comet. That's the thing. Like people sit on the comet still, but now instead of getting off like, well, you don't need armor and you don't need glory gold turn one potentially. Instead of getting off, I mean, what's your options? You're not going to pentagram sucks turn one most of the time, and you can small hellfire or you can risk a big hellfire if you really want, which is possible. It depends on the target. Like sometimes it's amazing. Like Verse Demons, don't get me wrong, getting a hellfire off turn one is amazing. But now, like people sit on that spell, whatever it may be, and you get off this dance a lot, or you get off this Touch of the Reaper, and so your phase just feels a little more dirty early on, because if you do need to play the kind of back off game, even without taking Veilwalker on the Herald, you have potentially Comet, Snipes, to kind of do that. Or if you really want to take Veilwalker on the Herald, you have, a 2 dice Touch of the Reaper, you have big Hellfires, you can take Hellfires on him. I don't know if you take like I said, I don't know if Veilwalker is the play on this guy. I think it probably is pretty good. And then you just never take it on your Herald. You just never take you don't really need to ever take the Veilwalker upgrade. The only reason it's good is if you really have a Graves Call target, which you may. The reason being is Mark for Doom is not that different than Touch of the Reaper, especially if you have Veilwalker because of the rerolls. And you can just take the H spell on this guy if you really need to. And so you have that flexibility where the Herald does have some buffs and does have some damage spells, and so you don't always feel the need to take Hasten and Touch. If there's not a great Hasten target, if you don't feel like you need double snipes, you just take Touch for maybe a big monster. You take 2 buffs and the movement spell, and then your Herald is free to take maybe more smaller spells and Comet, like where he might have Breath Weapon, Pentagram, Comet, and so you don't feel as bad. Because, like, if you don't take, does that make sense? I hope that makes sense to you guys, where you can like sit on comment a little more. And I mean, it's basically in the games I've played, it's basically how it's went. I've taken comment on my Herald, I've taken like Dance and Touch of the Reaper, and turn one I dance and move an Elder into somebody's face, 16 inches plus 12, and they sit on the comment, and maybe it goes off, maybe it doesn't, but it just feels good to have that move spell turn one on such a fast army when they pretty much have to stop comment, depending on the list. So I think there's like a lot of flexibility, not only in just getting more spells, but what this lore kind of adds to the Herald ability. And it's in a weird way, it makes Comet much easier to cast because this provides really good spells in the form of 5 and 6. Depending on the buffs are always going to be good. You're always Spectral Blades, Haste, Ancestral Aid, and Whispers are always pretty good to have. You can also take Smite on the Herald if you need to. But at the same time, like, if they're bad against Snipes, you go double Snipes and they're annoyed, and you potentially opens up Common. If they're bad, if you really want to do the move spell, that opens up things. And if they're not, if these two, if Touch and Hasten like suck versus them, you just take 3 buffs, dance, and take some offensive spells on your Herald and go to town that way. Take Hellfire, Pentagram, whatever, right? So I think it opens up matches, and not only for even the aggressive style armies where the move spell can help, but like if people are planning to play like kind of wishy-washy back, and this is probably even more so if you have Veilwalker on your Evo guy, because now your snipes are 30 inches and 24. You're at a safe range. That's probably the biggest thing, right? Instead of sniping from 18, you're sniping from 24 or 30. You might just be like sitting back and saying, I'm going to come at you and I'm going to throw double snipes at you. And if you come at me, I'm a huge threat with all my combat stuff. So maybe it helps you in those matches where people are really playing back and really playing like a bitch, and you really can't afford to go in. Where it just gives you that boost of magic phase where the cherry guy just doesn't. Right? There's nothing you can take on him that you're just like, man, this is really gonna get him, and have a ton of impact. Of course, Lash versus a perfect target is really good, but honestly, a lot of the good Lash targets. Touch of the Reaper and Snipes do the kind of the same thing, in essence. So this is the big change that we're gonna, at least I'm going to try out, is having this Evo guy. And yes, you're gonna have to put him in a unit. You're gonna have to find a way to keep him alive. But I've enjoyed having him so far, and I think the spell power could really, you know, have some really big impacts on how matchups are played and how people view your army. And if I can just rein myself in on some of my aggression sometimes, and be a little more patient with snipes and maybe comets, it could really help those poor matchups. So that's something I'm looking forward to trying. 7 spells. I still love the Herald, but like I said, it opens up things on him, like taking Comet more. And I love this idea of this new dance spell being 18 inches and 18. I think 18 inches in the 12-inch move, as I said, being able to go through this terrain piece instead of like just cutting the corner, like it's massive, right? Because there's a couple boards where it has a house or something, like you could just line up right here, and then boom, turn one, you just run right through it. And if you get behind them with an Elder or your Herald or something, it could be deadly turn one. So anyway, that's my 25 minutes, not bad. All right, thanks.